Start the recording. All right. Well, welcome this evening. Welcome to the 2022-23 Humankind series. My name is Mike Nagel, and I teach history and political science here at West Shore. And I'm happy to be involved in this evening's event. Humankind is West Shore's cultural arts and lecture series. This series includes events like tonight's panel, which is focusing on a particular topic. In the past, we've had lectures by outside speakers, but the series also includes musical performances, art exhibits, and feature films. This is actually the 6th year for West Shore's Humankind series. The focus for this year's events is around the future of work. More specifically, we're wondering, what is the future of work? We ask this because we're not exactly sure where and how the nature of the workplace will change over the next decade and even through the decades to come. Now, I wanted to let everyone know that this is being recorded. And it will be available at a later time in case you would like to review some of the things that we talk about. If you do ask a question, you can post that in the Q&A, but don't worry, your name won't appear and we wouldn't see anything. But I did want everyone to know that this is being recorded. Tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to have a panel discussion of 3 West Shore employees. I'll go ahead and introduce each of our speakers now. Dr. Wendy Wells is our Talent Pipeline Coordinator at West Shore. She holds a Bachelor of Science from Bowling Green State University, as well as a Master's and PhD from the University of Akron in Industrial and Organizational Psychology. Kellen Petzak is a Professor of Computer Information Technology. He holds a bachelor's degree from Davenport University and a master's in Cybersecurity and Information Assurance from Western Governors University. I'm also going to be a presenter this evening. And as I said, I teach history and political science here. And I have a bachelor's degree and master's degree from Western Washington University. My bachelor's is in education and my master's is in history. So the format for tonight is for each of our panelists to provide a short presentation, maybe 12 to 15 minutes, which should leave us some time for question and answers at the end. If you do have any questions, if you could please post those in the Q&A function, we'll try to address some of those questions that may come up during tonight's presentation. So I will go ahead and start sharing my screen and go ahead with the first presentation. And I will be talking about the past from the past, present, and future of work. Okay. All right. So when we look at the past and we look at the United States really has a rich agricultural heritage. Most of the people who came to the United States in previous years, particularly prior to 1900, they came here to farm. And so really in the colonial era and even up to 1800, maybe 90% or so, those figures that I've got there are approximations, but maybe 90% were engaged in farming. By 1850, still a majority of people were farmers, but we're down to 64%. By 1900, the census shows us that less than 50% of Americans were working on farms. So what I kind of want to do is I want to talk about the work life for people on farms, and then that transition to the early stages of the Industrial Revolution as the nation began to industrialize. So if you think about what most of those farms were like, even going back to the colonial era and on, these were subsistent, they practiced subsistence agriculture. And usually this was dominated by the family economy. As far as the work schedule went, this was heavily influenced by the seasons. So in the spring, you would have a lot of heavy work, a lot of work that would need to be done in order to prepare the fields for the crops to be planted. Then you've got the planting. Throughout the summer, you've got to weed through the different crops. You've got to make sure that they're protected. You got to make sure that they've got enough water and a lot of irrigation. And so there's a lot of heavy work at that time as well. And then in the fall, in the autumn, that would be harvest season. So you're working long hours based upon the seasons. And generally speaking, at some point in the fall, families would end up having some sort of, do I dare say, a Thanksgiving or a harvest festival of some sort, so that you could celebrate the seasons and all the work that you've done. The hard work for the spring and the summer and the fall was offset in a way by the winter, where there was still work to be done, but not quite as much. There was also a difference in the workload based upon sex. Men were often responsible for the heavy work. They were the ones who decided when you would actually harvest things. They were responsible for clearing the land for plowing, determining when to plant crops and things like that. And so there was a lot of the heavy work that men were responsible for. Women often had endless chores. Maybe they were manufacturing soap, or they were preserving food. They were sewing clothing, churning butter for their families, all the while caring and taking care of the household and taking care of their children. If you've ever heard that phrase, a woman's work is never done, well, that was very common on the farms. Children also played a role, maybe beginning at the age of 5, maybe 7, depending upon the responsibility of the family and just the nature of the child. Maybe they could start to feed the chickens. Maybe they could go out and they could go to the hen house and they could get some of the eggs. So they wouldn't be responsible for a lot of the heavy work, but there would be some responsibilities. And this family unit would work as one in order to have a subsistence farm. One thing also that I'd just like to point out is that in addition to those subsistence farms, that in different time periods of U.S. history, there were cash crops that were created and that people produced. So in the early era, tobacco really was the key crop. In the Chesapeake Bay area, like around Maryland and Virginia, think of Jamestown, that area. And then down in South Carolina, rice and indigo were important cash crops. Those were both tobacco as well as rice were very labor intensive. And so if you think about the workers in those, well, the work was often done by indentured servants as well as slaves. Now, if you're not familiar with indentured servants, these were people who had come from Europe, and maybe they didn't have the money to pay for their way across. And so someone would pay for their trip to what they called the New World. And in return, those servants would work for a period of time, usually some maybe 4 years, maybe 7 years. And essentially they would work as a slave. These were indentured servants were white, okay? But they would work for 4 to 7 years, depending upon their contract. And the image on the left there shows a typical indentured servant contract. They might work 6 days a week, sunrise to sunset. They could be bought and sold like a piece of property. If you ran away, you'd be punished. But once you completed your contract, once you ended your service, well, you would receive land, and you could also receive some supplies. And there was no negative stigma attached to it. Life for slaves was different. Okay, the image on the right shows Charleston's Harbor, which was the #1 port of entry for slaves. Just as indentured servants could be bought and sold, okay, so too were slaves. They worked from sunup to sunrise. Chores also had to be completed at night. If they did work on Sundays, slaves could actually earn a little bit of extra money, but they could be beaten, whipped, and were not allowed to travel freely. And there was no contract. After 5 or 7 years, you remained a slave. And by the way, slaves were of African descent. Clearly, we had a division between white laborers and black laborers in this era. As the years grew on, new pieces of technology led to different crops becoming more common. By the 1820s, Eli Whitney's cotton gin had spread to many different parts of the country. And so throughout the South, you saw an explosion of the production of cotton, and slavery expands right with it. Again, slaves were slaves for life. They were property of their owners. And one study that I showed said that, the owners of indentured servants would have to provide food and shelter for the indentured servants. But generally speaking, they would only pay about half, or the cost of of providing the food and things like that for slaves was only about half of what the rate was that they provided for their indentured servants. By the 1860s, the United States was involved in the Civil War. The Homestead Act was passed in 1862 during the war, and this really transformed farming in the United States, and it allowed people to have free access to land in parts of what at that time was considered the West. Think of Nebraska, Kansas, even parts of Michigan, but Iowa and areas like that. Adults could select 160 acres of surveyed land as long as it had not been claimed. And after 5 years, that land was theirs for only a nominal fee. I love this next slide, and I love it because this is a homestead contract that I was able to see at the National Archives. And the arrow, you probably can't see it. I'll try this. Okay, maybe you can see it. Can you see the name of the person there? It's Charles Ingalls. If you're a fan of Little House on the Prairie, I just thought that this was awesome. The Ingalls family was able to get a homestead of 160 acres. And that was from I think the 1880s, because the Homestead Act extended. This provided an opportunity to well over 400,000 families to become landowners. And so the Homestead Act really was transformational. However, people went back to that, if you were working on those farms, you were again needing to work long hours. Your days were, and your workload was governed by the months out of the year and the weather. But you could expect a 60 to 80 hour work week in the spring and in the summer and in the early part of the fall. That summer heat in areas out west and the humidity would be contrasted with really tough winters where people might have to live through blizzards. And there sometimes people even lived in sod homes at that time. And so life was really pretty tough. And you might have things like locusts or mosquitoes or grasshoppers that could provide a threat to your crops. In the years after the Civil War, the United States began to industrialize. This map identifies the rise of industry in the United States, or the locations, I should say, of industry at or about 1900. And most manufacturing in the United States was located where those black dots are shown, okay, like in the New England area and in the Northeast. With industrialization came many labor-saving devices like sewing machines, electricity, even indoor plumbing. Mass production of paper made newsprint much more affordable. And along with that, there was greater access to education, which leads to higher rates of literacy. So there are a lot of positives associated with this. However, there was a huge transition from farm to factory. And that old farming mindset was replaced with a new industrial perspective. Rather than working in family units, what you saw is that people often would work at large factories, and you might not even know the people that you're working next to. You definitely wouldn't know your supervisor. Often tasks would be repetitive, and rather than the seasons determining your workload and your work pace, people's days were governed by the clock and the whistle. At a certain time, a whistle would go off and you better be at your station at a factory, or you could end up losing your position. And if you had to keep working until that whistle went off at a particular time. And so there's this shift in the pace and the nature of work as the nation began to industrialize. Really, from 1865 to 1900, you see a lot of the industrialization of the United States. Average work week at this time, if you're working in a factory in that, 10 or 12-hour days, 6 days a week. Possibly the leading industry in the United States in the late 1800s was the railroad industry. In 1889, the first year that statistics were kept, 2,000 workers died on the job. 20,000, more than 20,000 were injured. And so this came with certain threats. Skilled workers could often earn as much as $3 a day, maybe even more, depending upon the industry that they were in. Generally speaking, if you were an unskilled worker in northern areas, you could earn about $2 a day. Southern mill workers who also were unskilled, less than $1 a day. If you were a farm laborer, throughout much of the year, you could earn maybe about $1.50 a day. But during the harvest time, when there was really a need for people there, that's when you could earn more than $2 a day. And these figures are really kind of approximations. The steel industry was one of the leading industries in the United States. Shifts were really difficult there because once they got those furnaces going, they didn't want to turn them off. So typical shifts were 7 days a week for 12 hours a day. 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. You could get a day off once per month. Okay, so typically what would happen is that you would work from 7 in the morning till 7 at night, and you'd work that for maybe 2 weeks. Then at the end of 2 weeks, you would shift to 7 at night to 7 in the morning. That allowed one group to get their 1 day off, but the other group had to work 24 hours straight. So these were really dangerous conditions. Also in 1900, we see the continuation of child laborers. Again, on those farms, kids would work beginning at the age of 5 or 7, something like that. But they always had their family members there. By 1900, you see 2 million children who were working for wages, and they didn't have their parents there to keep an eye on them. And so sometimes they would be faced with injuries or they could get hurt on the job. And by the way, women have always worked. But if women have been homemakers, they just don't get a paycheck often. But in 1900, 17% of the workforce was female. And they figured that it was okay to pay women less than men at that time because they supposedly were not the major wage earners for their families. So over time, we see a standard of living that actually increases. You've got sewing machines that are replacing just a needle and thread. You've got higher rates of literacy. You've got higher rates of education and things like that. But there's a major impact with impact to the family as this family economy where family members are working together and you've got that family unit. Well, it's replaced with this so-called industrial family. So that's just a little bit about the so-called past in terms of the past, present, and future of work. So my work is done. I can leave now, right? But anyway, so just a little bit of an introduction to some history. So you want to take it away?
All right. So as we transition, I'm going to be talking about the present of work. And I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach. I'm going to be looking more at the kind of psychological, more of the psychological experience of work and attitudes toward work, and also the implications for both employees and employers. Where appropriate, where appropriate and where there's actually research, I'll try to bring in generational differences and generational trends. And most of that's important because it helps us to project what those attitudes might be in the future. So let me just kind of go through and just briefly go through the generations. So the traditionalists, which there are still some in the workforce and the labor force, but that's definitely dwindling. Those traditionalists are individuals who were born between 1928 and 1945. They're currently 77 to 94 years of age, and they experienced historical events like the Great Depression, World War II, and there were HR-related events, which would be the scientific management, which is the idea of trying to whittle down a job to its very small, repetitive parts for efficiency. But as you can imagine, those types of jobs were very boring and routine and not very stimulating. So the baby boomers born in 46 to 64, they're 58 and 6 to 76 years of age. They experienced the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement. And HR-related events that were happening during that time was this concern about employee needs, realizing that they're not robots and that repetitive work is boring and not engaging. And so really trying to understand how to motivate employees. At that time, the Civil Rights Act was also passed, which had implications for hiring and other employment practices. Gen X, those were born between 65 and 80. They experienced Watergate and the AIDS epidemic. And the HR-related events for that generation would be work-life balance and also the Age Discrimination and Employment Act. So here you start to see this idea of work-life balance. Prior to that, the baby boomers were characterized as being having a really strong work ethic, working really hard, working long hours, whereas Gen X started to shift to realize they wanted a balance. They saw their parents working lots of hours, and they didn't necessarily want to have that for themselves and for their children. So here you start to see the work-life balance. In Gen Y, 81 to 96, these would be 26 to 41-year-olds. Columbine, they experienced in the dot-com boom. Some of the HR-related events for that generation would be flexible schedules were introduced, more likely like flex time. Feedback became more important, and the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. Gen Z would be 97 through 2012, and they experienced 9/11 and the Great Recession. HR-related events for that particular generation would be the term engagement was the buzzword and still is somewhat the buzzword, and flexible work continued to be a concern for employees and employers. And then Generation Alpha, this is the current generation, and they experienced COVID-19. They're also deemed the COVID generation. They've also are experiencing the Great Resignation. So HR-related events related to that are the flexibility and wellness. So that's what I'm going to be talking about, is what's currently happening, what are the current trends, and the theme is flexibility and wellness. So I'm going to talk about the different facets of flexibility that employees want and that employers are responding to. So one of the things that employees are concerned about is who they want to work for. And many employees have chosen the gig economy, deciding to be independent contractors, not necessarily working for one particular company for a long period of time. This is especially true for millennials. They find it much more appealing. They like that independence. And even though the paychecks may not necessarily be stable, again, it depends on the gigs, they're willing to sacrifice that for the independence. They also, in terms of who they want to work for, is they want to work for a company that has values that match their own. So for example, in one particular study, they found that 8 in 10 survey respondents said it's more important to work for a company that aligned with their own values, and they were willing to leave that company for one that was more aligned with their values. So what are those values? What is it that they're looking for? Well, one of the things they're looking for is diversity. 46% would consider switching employees for one that was more diverse or had a more comprehensive diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. Employees are also looking for companies that are more transparent. So in particular, pay transparency. 60% of US employees said that they would consider switching jobs for another organization that had greater pay transparency. And then the other value is the concern for environment. 51% of employees that were polled would consider switching for an organization that had a focus on sustainability and corporate social responsibility. They also were interested in working for a company where the executives' compensation was tied to environmental, social, and governance initiatives. The other type of organization that they want to work for is one that has good managers. A Gallup report from 2022 reports that 60% of employees are not engaged, meaning they're not satisfied, and 19% are actively disengaged, which means they're emotionally disconnected from work and the workplace. And what they found in that particular study is that there were 5 sources of burnout for those employees that were disengaged and actively disengaged. and they were all related to one supervisor. So those things were unfair treatment, unmanageable workload, unreasonable time pressure, unclear communication, and unsupportive managers. And what we know is that the engagement of workers are they're actually predictive of retention, productivity, safety, and profitability. So it's important, obviously, that workers, when they're not engaged, it will affect the bottom line for companies. So the implication here for organizations is that they need to be more aware of workers' values and expectations. And they can do this through listening programs, culture surveys, and particularly more frequent feedback touch points. They also need to proactively manage those expectations of employees. And they can do this through better communication of their organizational mission, vision, and values, and policies that align with employees' values, and then make changes where they can. In terms of flexibility in what they do, that's also of interest to employees. So researchers Wisniewski and Dutton coined the term job crafting. And this is where employees get to craft a portion or all parts of their job. And they worked with a company called Morningstar. And what they did is the Morningstar company let their employees work in a job using the description of their previous person in that role. But then after 1 year, they were able to rewrite that job description with two conditions. One was that they had to explain how that change would advance the company's mission. And number two, they had to get agreement from the people that they were working with. And what they found was that flexibility to customize their work was related to higher performance, higher satisfaction, and lower retention. Also, Google, many of you have probably heard of Google's 20% time. That's also an example of job crafting. So Google allows their employees 20% of their time to work on projects that may not show quick results, but that could potentially lead to big gains for the company, even if it's outside their job description. Another area of flexibility is where employees work. Where employees work. And so this is an example to kind of show you remote versus hybrid versus in-person locations of work. And so what you'll see here is that exclusively remote has decreased a little bit since the COVID shelter in place, but the hybrid has actually increased. And hybrid would be a mix between remote as well as in-person. So we definitely see a rise in the hybrid format of work. If you think about it, remote work also helps the company's DEI initiatives. It might actually help to recruit underrepresented groups, such as working mothers, individuals with physical mobility challenges, and also maybe workers who may experience less stress under remote working conditions. But remote work has downsides for employers and employees. One particular drawback is that it may limit information and information that's formal and informal. This is what we call the water cooler talk. Standing around the water cooler in person, talking about things related to work and things not related to work. But losing that by not working in the office could potentially hurt individuals. So there was one particular study that showed that remote interns in a large company who had virtual water cooler talks, which were more intentional talks with senior managers, they tended to have more satisfaction and higher performance ratings and were more likely to be asked back. So that might be one way to address the minimization of that informal and formal conversations at the water cooler. A second kind of downside is that it may limit feedback opportunities. So what we know is that feedback in the form of annual performance reviews are pretty common. but workers are demanding more frequent feedback and also formal or informal feedback. In fact, 85% of millennials would feel much more comfortable in their current position if they had more frequent feedback, performance reviews, or conversations with their managers. And we know that feedback is essential for good performance, and good performance should lead to promotion. But yet, if the workers aren't in the office and they're working remotely, will they be forgotten? In one particular study by Bloom in 2014, the study was done in China, they found that remote workers were 13% more likely to be productive, but less likely to be promoted. And so again, that lack of face time with senior managers may adversely affect their promotional opportunities. Because of this, organizations need to be aware of this and allow hybrid and remote work to communicate and collect performance indicators that are clear and objective. So it's important for organizations to have those performance indicators and that the employees know what those are, so it doesn't have an adverse effect on their promotion opportunities. Also, it may, this hybrid and remote work might actually weaken our in-person interpersonal skills and make collaboration more difficult. So employers like the United States Patent and Trademark Office are trying to combat that with setting policies related to virtual collaboration, mentoring, and asynchronous brainstorming sessions. Lots of organizations are also using collaboration tools like Slack and Jamboards to address, again, the collaboration issues. So for these reasons, hybrid and remote work may make it more difficult for new employees to learn the company's culture and feel like they're a part of the culture. Employees may need to reevaluate how they transmit their mission, vision, and values in their onboarding process to ensure newcomers have ample opportunities to live, learn, and love the organizational culture. Employers also need to clearly define how they will create a fair and equitable workplace for all employees, regardless of where they work and whether their manager is physically present, and also set expectations for teams for collaboration and communication. When people work, this is another area of flexibility. What time should we work? One of the initiatives, Flex Time, was initiated years ago where employees could work a core set of hours, but they could decide to come in later or come in earlier if they chose. In some jobs, remote work allows the flexibility for people to decide when they want to work. It doesn't necessarily have to be tied to the traditional Monday through Friday 8 to 4 or 9 to 5 timeframe. So with the flexibility of where and when to work comes new challenges, of course. If you think about it, there might be more pressure to collaborate, more virtual meetings, less downtime between meetings because you don't have to drive to the meetings or walk to those meetings, and just plain working more. So as these work and home lines are blurred and work isn't confined just to the corporate walls, Adam Grant suggests organizations need better boundaries on work time for remote workers. Policies can help employees know when they're expected to work and not work. For example, some companies have a no emails in the evening or no emails on the weekend policies. What about what days to work? As the Industrial Revolution brought about the 40-hour Monday through Friday work week, employees now are questioning whether that's the best way to work. And so having a more flexible schedule in terms of which days to work may actually alleviate some of the childcare concerns that employees are facing. It also allows individuals to squeeze in appointments during the week where doctors' offices are not open on Saturdays or on the weekends. One drawback to this is that it might dampen motivation. In one particular study, they found that working non-standard times, for example, weekends and holidays, significantly reduced their intrinsic motivation, which also negatively affected their job motivation and enjoyment. And why is this? Think about it. It's social norms. When is it appropriate to work? Most people are ingrained in the idea that we work Monday through Friday, 40 hours a week, 9 to 5 or 8 to 4. And so what happens is that for those remote workers who work non-traditional times, they're thinking about the ways that they could be using their time or what their friends are doing, kind of the fear of missing out, FOMO. And that in particular is decreasing their intrinsic motivation. And so one way to combat that would be to have those individuals change their mindset by focusing on the benefits of the flexible work, what they're allowed, what they are able to do because of that schedule rather than what they're not able to do. And then what about the number of days of work? Adam Grant noted that 4 days a week job postings tripled from 2018 to 2021. However, it's still not a common policy. Less than 1% of jobs are 4 day a week jobs. But for example, Shake Shack started a 4-day work week program for managers in 2019 to provide them more work-life balance. But they've had to pause that program because of labor shortages. Microsoft Japan tested a 4-day work week, and what they found was that productivity climbed by 40% and costs declined. The Icelandic government tested reducing work weeks from 40 to 35 or 36 hours at the same pay with about 2,500 workers in offices, hospitals, and police stations over a 4-year period. It found that well-being and work-life balance improved and productivity was either sustained or it was actually increased. And this same sort of project or pilot is being conducted in Britain, and they're doing that across 60 companies over 6 months, which started in June and will end in December 2022. So we'll have to see what their results show in terms of productivity. And then lastly, related to the benefits they need, again, they're looking for more flexible benefits. And so what they're looking for, again, would be being able to pick and choose. Everybody's situation is different. And so individuals with children might benefit from more childcare benefits, whereas individuals who are younger without children might be kind of a health club membership or things of that nature. And so, and also, you know, wellness programs as well, right? So it could just be physical. It could also be mental and career-wise. And so that leads into the second theme or the second kind of concept that employees want or desire from their workplace, and that would be wellness. It's a culture of care. And so usually when we think about wellness programs, we think about physical health, but there's a shift now to include other things. So physical health is still important, but mental and emotional are just as important, especially after COVID or during COVID, now after past COVID. And so what we know is that that health, mental and health is important. We do know, there's an example here. This is a slide that shows global prevalence and burden of depressive and anxiety disorders in 204 countries and territories in 2020. And what this will show is, if you see at the top, those represent prevalence of anxiety disorders, and I'm sorry, major depressive disorders, and B shows anxiety disorders. And it shows during the COVID pandemic and versus before the pandemic. So in the peach colored, you can see that the anxiety disorders and depressive major disorders have increased during those timeframes. And in particular, it's adversely affected women more so than men, and younger individuals versus older individuals. And so because of that, organizations are going to want to have multiple options in terms of mental and emotional wellness. And so, for example, there's a program, it's called We Connect Health app, that helps individuals manage drug addictions. And this actually was, the co-founder is Ludington's own Murphy Jensen. And so apps such as that could help individuals manage their mental and emotional issues to help them be successful at work. They're also looking for financial education. And so according to Forbes article, financial worries and stress over money management have a significant impact on productivity. So recent data shows that employees with high levels of financial stress lose 41% more work time. They're more absent. So what you see here also in there with career wellness, better career planning, succession planning or career pathways, different options for individuals to move to different positions and gaining the training that they need are important. So here you see a shift from improving organizational benefits that are more aligned with the individual's family life, and not necessarily just their work life. So in summary, it's an employee's market. And with birth rates decreasing, employers are needing to reevaluate work and the benefits it provides in order to attract the talent that they need to be able to be profitable. And that then ends my presentation.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk about sort of projections for the future of work, and nobody has a crystal ball, and you'll see in my presentation that there's a lot of projections going on. Obviously, with the pandemic, we've had huge shifts in different ways we're doing things at work, but we're going to look at some of that data and just look at some trends, and we'll just discuss those here. I'll start with Moore's law. So there was one of the founders of Intel came up with this law where essentially the transistors of a microchip double about every 2 years. And this was done in 1965. And what that means is the cost of our computers is halved. And essentially our computers, you could say from a layman's term, get twice as good every 2 years or so. And that's why you've seen such an explosion in technology over the past 40, 50, 60 years. And we'll look at another chart here. So if we looked at, this chart right here, we can sort of see that exponential curve of computing power. And we saw the agricultural revolution. If you look at the top of the screen, 8,000 years to get to the industrial revolution, to the light bulb, 120 years, to 90 years to the moon landing, 22 years to the World Wide Web, and then 9 years to sequence the human genome. And that's because our computers, the transistors on our microchips are getting condensed, and our computers are getting that much better. And the rate of change is on an exponential curve. So that's why, just anecdotally, you can think about your own life. I think about my life. I was born in a house without a computer or the internet. By the time I was 3, I remember we had a computer. By the time I was 11 or 10, we had dial-up internet. Then by the time I was a senior in high school, we had smartphones. And now we're here. It's over a decade later now, but now we can see the way technology is shaping the workforce. Social media and phones have continued to get better, automation and things. So we're at a rate of change that's going to continue to increase over our lifetimes. 3 big things that are driving this are automation, which we've had automation for a long time now. You can think about car factories that have been able to automate the processes of building cars. When you couple that with artificial intelligence and IoT, or what's called the Internet of Things, though, it explodes to a point where machines can do a lot of work for us. So artificial intelligence is the idea that use software that can make decisions and can learn based on huge data sets. The Internet of Things is the idea that we have computers embedded in all of our objects. So phones were one of the first IoT devices. We have smart cars now. We have, you even got your smart fridges, toasters. There's locks for your doors. You might have cameras outside your house that you can log in on your cell phone. And with 5G and the and Wi-Fi getting better and 5G coming into fruition are coming about, there are just going to be more and more devices that will be able to collect data and will be able to automate things based using automation. So really for us, and we can see similar to computing power, IoT devices are growing at an exponential rate almost. So in the future of work, automation is going to make drastic changes to the market, to the job market. And there's a bunch of different organizations here. And this is from an MIT technology review. They looked at a bunch of different organizations that had projections of, what jobs will automation and artificial intelligence and IoT destroy, and what jobs will it create? And there's a lot of disagreement here. You can look at this chart and see there's differences in the numbers between all these organizations. But one thing is certain is that there is going to be major changes. Technology is creating a ton of new jobs. It's eliminating some jobs. And so going forward, that's an important thing to think about when we look at the job market. The McKinsey did a study showing what types of skills we'll need for our future, for the future of work. So future work skills. Physical and manual skills are going to shrink. And this is over from 2016 to 2030. Basic cognitive skills are going to shrink the amount of people that will need to do basic cognitive skills because we have computers that can now make decisions. So higher cognitive skills, we're going to need more of them. Social emotional skills, we will need more. And technological skills, we will need more. And this is because we're going to be working alongside these systems, these automated systems based on artificial intelligence and IoT. And we need people to communicate and run these systems. So there has to be communication and collaboration. And then we also need technical skills, obviously, to run these systems. So in the future, these are areas where we'll want to focus on developing young people and ourselves. And this doesn't mean that, everybody has to be an IT geek or whatever, or it just means that whatever you're going to go into, you're going to want to have these interpersonal skills, these soft skills, and you also want to have tech skills along with that. I'm all for people going and doing what they love to do. You should do that, but you can along the way give yourself some skills that will then hopefully help you better progress your career. Like if you are a history major, and you obtain data analyst skills or analysis skills, you can increase your entry salary. Sociology, if you learn UX, UI design skills or designing software. English and literature, you obtain project management skills. And psychology, who obtain IT management skills. We need people to manage the people running these systems. But in all these cases, if you learn these soft skills, these along with the technical skills, it will put you in a better place to, be able to progress. And I think we can all see that in the working world now. One study from an IT service management firm showed, and this is interesting. So we just sort of talked about the skills of the work life, or the skills of future work and some projections there. And we'll talk about the future work life. And I'm just going to look at it from the perspective of the workers, but an IT service management firm named Avanti surveyed a lot of office workers and IT professionals across several different countries, or a group of different countries. And it found that nearly 9 out of 10 survey respondents don't want to work in the office full time. Nearly half would be happy to never step foot in the office again. And while 42 indicated they prefer a hybrid model that splits time between home and office. And we can see that happening in the pandemic, obviously made that expedited the process of the hybrid work model and the remote work model. It was happening before that, but that just expedited it. One shocking statistic is that 71% say they would choose to be able to work from anywhere, have that flexibility over a job promotion or a compensation increase. And I like Wendy's point, because I think a lot of people early in their career who might want to work remote, you don't realize that when you're next to the the water cooler and you talk to your managers, there is some of those connections that you can't really quantify that might get you a step in your career higher. But people felt this way. They want to work remote or the hybrid model because there's less time commuting. You have a more flexible schedule generally, and there's a better work-life balance. And that is the end of what I have to say about the future of work. Like I said, a lot of projections, but things are going to be changing. Embrace change, and we'll send it off to Mike.
Well, what I can say real quickly, Kellen, is that I'm glad we still will need history majors.
Yeah.
I'm glad to see that. Yes.
We definitely will. Maybe they should learn some data. They should learn some data analytics too, and then they'll be,
Yeah. Could you stop sharing your screen then, if we want to kind of open it up to others? I did. So this is just great. It's great to see, like to hear the different perspectives on things, whether it's now or projections into the future and things like that. There was one thing that really struck me, Wendy, with what you had to say, is that the increase in hybrid workplace and people being, having that flexibility. And that also ties into what Kellen had to say about how some groups of employees are saying that they would rather have that flexibility and they would take that hybrid status as opposed to a pay raise. So I don't know, would either of you like to jump in on that, and just, is there a little more research or anything you'd like to add with that?
Well, I mean, I think we're talking about the hybrid, obviously, if you do it completely remote, in some ways it's kind of beneficial for the company because they don't have to have a brick and mortar location, and they can actually recruit from all over the world. But a hybrid, they could only recruit within a certain geographic area. So it may be best for employees, but I'm not sure that it's the best for employers.
Interesting. And since it's an employee's market right now too, so that balance there. So Kellen, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I just think it'll be interesting to see that tug of war going forward, and to see which some companies will definitely embrace the remote work more and some won't. Even a couple of the adjuncts that teach in our IT courses here, they work remote in IT positions, and they really like it. And that's anecdotal, but it's just going to be, and so it'll be interesting to see that, how that plays out.
Yeah. We've got about 20 people or so that are here, and what I'd like to offer is, or encourage people to do, is if you have a question or if you had a comment, if you could post that in the Q&A, that could help us to try to address some questions that you may have after having seen this. One of the things that also struck me, so if I can just start with that, but if others can maybe post something in the Q&A. Wendy, we need to move to Iceland, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think it's great. And you know what, also I should have mentioned, and this is actually most important, is that they didn't dock their pay, right? So they got paid the same amount, even though they only worked 35 to 36 hours. Now,
they're doing a similar type of an experiment, if that's the right word, or a test in the UK, I think you said.
Yes, that's true.
And these are mainly office type positions. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, there's a variety. I mean, they're office, but also, I mean, I was kind of surprised that police officers were also included. And that was the same in the Icelandic also. But my guess is with the 60 companies in the UK, and I didn't see a list, but my guess it's going to cover a variety of industries, right? It's not just going to be, financial or health related, right? So it would be better for them to do it across several industries. And my guess is that that's what they're doing.
Yeah, interesting. The police folks focus on that. So, okay. Oh, looks like we've got something in the Q&A. Okay. So here's a question. How do you think the increase in the number of individuals acting as caregivers for both their children and aging family members is affecting this drive for more flexibility? Maybe Wendy or Kellen, would one of you like to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that I can't remember, it's called like the sandwich generation, right? Because they're taking care of their kids, but they're also taking care of their parents. And so it's creating more stress on workers, right? However, remote work doesn't necessarily remove all of the stress, right? So if you are working from home, you may have kids there that you have to attend to, as well as an aging parent that may be living with you. But again, I think it really kind of speaks to, what's best for the individual. And again, not everybody's going to, I guess, want the same thing. Even in the same situation, someone might still desire to do a hybrid rather than completely remote.
Kellen, did you notice any of that in your research, like moving into the future as the baby boom generation, this really large generation continues to age, and they may need more, healthcare, and family members helping them out? Did you notice, did that come up in any of your research for into the future?
Well, yeah, we know, we know just that there's, a lack of childcare to begin with, even with the baby boomers. And you'll see a lot of people using that flexibility to, in between meetings, going and running, pick their kids up from school, or doing those types of things. So that definitely plays into it. And there's obviously the government's working on policy to try to make childcare easier, but that's just one of the things that I think is one of the reasons that people want that hybrid or flex or the remote work is to do those things. Definitely.
One of the things that I've noticed is that that'll come up in a future event that we'll be staging in early November, is like who's working remotely, and we'll be able to hear from some people who are working remotely. It looks like we also have some other questions. So here's a question. Are there any particular jobs or careers that are focusing on wellness or concerns, or where this tug of war between employers and employees is strongest? This is beyond my kind of area. So a tug of war between employers and employees, like any particular industry where that's most common?
You mean businesses? I think maybe they're saying businesses or organizations that are more apt to adopt those types of policies. Sure,
I think so.
Yeah. I didn't necessarily identify anything in the research, but I would, I guess, hypothesize that it would be, larger companies because they can afford it, right? For example, like the flexible benefits, it's very expensive for companies to do that, because normally if they have a large quantity, they can get the bulk rate for their health insurance. And for smaller companies, it's just very difficult for them to do that. So my guess is it'd be larger companies, and companies like that, the ones that are well known, right? It's Google, Microsoft, the kind of the cutting edge companies that are trying to attract younger generations, but also even some of the other, even Gen X and some of the millennials too. So
yeah,
I think from the technology sector, you can see companies like Amazon, they have just a ton of job openings for software developers, fully remote. And if you can, you're starting to see that more and more of these young computer science graduates just being able to get a job at one of these big companies, and they could stay in Michigan. And so I think some of those companies are leading the way, but yeah, it's much easier for them to do something like that.
Yeah. I think we might have time for one more question. And we've got one here that I think is kind of good. Because Wendy, you had talked about those hybrid positions and how those are kind of like, increasing, it kind of seems like. But the question here is that why is it that if they do their work better because they have time and want to do it at a different time of day, why is it that they're wait a minute. Why is it that if they do their work better, they have time or want to do it at a different time of day, they are more likely to do a better job? Why is it that people are more productive? I guess it's linking this idea of productivity with the flexibility.
I think part of it's autonomy, being able to choose when you want to work empowers the person, and that may lead to higher job satisfaction. And we know that job satisfaction is related to performance. So I think that might be one reason.
I know that when I'm happier, I probably am a little more efficient, I guess too, and some things too is like if I know that if I have a deadline for something, sometimes I might that might be a motivator, for me to be able to get something done, and that can improve efficiency and things like that. So yeah. Well, my experience has been that like about an hour or so with the Zooms and like webinars like this, that's kind of something that is kind of a time frame. So if you do have more questions, please, if you want to email one of us, you could go through the directory at West Shore, and you've got Kellen Petzak, Wendy Wells, and Mike Nagel. And so you could go ahead and do that. But I did have a couple of things that I did want to point out. So I would be remiss if I did not mention that the next Humankind event, which will take place at Manastee's Vogue Theater. We have a great partnership with the Vogue. And so on Tuesday, October 11th at 7 p.m., Radium Girls is going to be shown. You can see a full list of the films, and there'll be 3 more, and upcoming Humankind events by visiting the West Shore website. Once you arrive at the website, choose Humankind under the Community drop-down menu. And I also want to give a shout out to West Shore's Performing Arts Series. This Saturday at 7:30 p.m., the Bebop Spartans from Michigan State University will perform at the West Shore Community College Center Stage Theater. Tickets are available at the West Shore ticket office. And I've got one more favor. So as you leave this Zoom session, you'll be asked to complete a survey. This will allow you to comment on the quality of the presentation. It's really important and helpful for us. So could you let us know what you liked about the presentation, as well as any opportunities we could implement to improve your experience? So thanks so much to each of the panel members and for everyone in the audience for listening to what we had to say for today. So thank you so much. And again, please contact us if you have some more information, if you have some more questions, and you could go through that directory at West Shore. So thank you, much appreciated. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, the rest of your day. And so thanks for joining us. All right. Okay. I'll go ahead and I'm just going to go ahead and end it for everybody.